If you saw my recent video, Japanese baseball records, you probably noticed a few non-Japanese players in there. That shouldn't come as much of a surprise. The league has been importing ex-major leaguers in large numbers since the 1960s, and some of them have been very successful, especially the power hitters. But one player really stands out among the league record holders, one who was there before all the others, whose career spanned a period of 20 years and included the time when Japan was at war. Not only does his name and face stand out from that era, but the story of how he got there, what he endured during his playing career, and how it all tragically ended is unique to this one player, Viktor Starffin. His story begins in the Russian Ural Mountain region, an unusual place to start any baseball story. Born in 1916, Viktor was less than a year old when the Russian Revolution took place, ending the reign of Tsar Nicholas II. His father had been born into the aristocracy and was rising quickly through the ranks of the army. In February of 1917, after the overthrow of the Tsar, he joined the White Russian rebels to fight against the provisional government. Fearing for his family's safety, he had his wife and only son, Viktor, sent to Siberia. After a long trip across the country, Viktor and his mother ended up in the Siberian village of Krasnoyarsk, where his father eventually joined them. They didn't stay long as the Red Army continued to move eastward. For a former Tsarist supporter and his family, it meant certain death if they were discovered. Eventually, they made it out of the country and settled in Harbin, a city in northeastern China, where they would remain for 5 years. At last, Viktor's father was able to obtain the required documents to get to their desired destination, Japan, spending nearly all the money the family had to get there. The family settled on the island of Hokkaido in the city of Asahikawa. The father found work in the business of importing European fabrics, and the mother worked at a tea house baking bread while their son attended school. As a student, Viktor, like most boys his age, embraced the new game of baseball, which was catching on around the country. He would eventually grow to be 6 feet tall, which at the time was huge compared with the average Japanese man. He became the star of his high school team, and, with the opportunity to receive a university scholarship, the future for this young athletic teenager was looking bright. But Viktor's accomplishments on the field would soon be overshadowed by tragedy in the family. Viktor's father had become romantically involved with a Russian immigrant girl who worked at the tea house with Viktor's mother. During their affair, the two of them sometimes got into heated arguments over Russian politics. One night, in February of 1933, Viktor's father stabbed the young woman to death. For this crime, Viktor's father was sentenced to 8 years in a prison labor camp. Around this time, a newspaper publisher in Tokyo named Matsutaro Shoriki had been sponsoring visits by groups of major leaguers to play against Japanese university all-star squads. The results were embarrassing for the Japanese, and Shoriki saw the need to start a professional league if they were ever to catch up with the Americans. One member of the American squad was Lefty O'Doul, who became good friends with Shoriki. O'Doul convinced Babe Ruth to join the 1934 squad visiting Japan, a team that also included Lou Gehrig, Jimmy Fox, and several other Major League All-Stars. Shoriki would need to get all the country's best players if he wanted to avoid another lopsided defeat. One player he had his eyes set on was Viktor Starffin. Viktor had 1 year of high school left, but he passed on it to join the Tokyo All-Star squad. Some say he was blackmailed into leaving Hokkaido to join the All-Stars. His father's situation brought the possibility of deportation. Others say he left willingly, saying that his father's imprisonment, combined with the closing of his mother's tea house, had made it an easier decision. Either way, 18-year-old Viktor joined the team, receiving a bonus and a monthly salary to play. On November 29, 1934, he made his debut in a one-inning relief appearance. He started the inning by retiring Charlie Gehringer, a future Hall of Famer. He then walked Ruth and Gehrig before getting the next two out for a scoreless, hitless inning. In 1935, Shoriki sent his all-star team, now known as the Giants, to the United States to play against college and amateur teams. The trip was a success, despite a few problems with immigration, due to Viktor not being a Japanese citizen. In one of these games, he pitched against future Hall of Famer Joe DiMaggio, with Joe going 1 for 3 against Viktor. 1936 was the first season for Japanese professional baseball, albeit a very short one. The Giants went 18-9 and claimed the first ever league championship. Starffin was 1-2 with a 2.63 ERA in 24 innings. The star of the team was Eiji Sawamura, who was 13-2 with a 1.05 ERA and threw the league's first no-hitter. In 1937, the league played its first full season. Though still playing in Sawamura's shadow, Victor managed a 28-11 record overall. In 1938, Sawamura left the team early in the season to serve in the war against China, which had just begun in the previous year. This meant that Victor, now 22, was the ace for the Giants. With an incredible workload of over 350 innings, he compiled a record of 33-11 with just a 1.49 ERA. A year later, he raised his win total to 42 while helping to guide his team to their second championship. That same year, he married another Russian immigrant, a woman named Lena. Victor's father, whose prison sentence had been reduced, was now free and able to attend the wedding. Everything was looking up for Victor. He was the star pitcher for the most popular team. He had found himself a wife. He would have been perfectly happy if nothing changed from that point on. But unfortunately for him, the country was changing in a big way. The dream life he had built for himself in the 1930s would not be the same in the 40s. At the start of the 1940 season, this new baseball league was in an uncomfortable place. As an American import, the sport was viewed with contempt by many in a country where xenophobia was on the rise. In response, the league decided to make itself more Japanese. Teams using English mascot names were changed to Japanese names. The lettering on uniforms was changed into kanji characters, and borrowed English words such as strike and ball were replaced by suitable Japanese words. Victor, having grown up in Japan, probably didn't see any harm in any of these changes. That is, until they decided to outlaw another foreign word, his name. From this point until the end of the war, he was known as Hiroshi Suda, having been given the choice between his name or his baseball career. On top of that humiliation, he was kept under constant surveillance for fear that he might be a spy. When his team traveled outside of Tokyo, he had to obtain special permission to accompany them. And though he had lived in Japan for nearly 20 years, his citizenship application was rejected around this time. Despite these mounting off-field distractions, his work on the mound didn't suffer one bit. In the 1940 season, he was 38-12, with 245 strikeouts and a 0.97 ERA, throwing 436 innings. For his pitching dominance, combined with rising proficiency at the plate, he was given the MVP award for the second straight year. In 1941, poor health limited him to only 20 appearances. Sawamura made a brief return and was once again the fan favorite, while another pitcher, Teruzo Nakao, became the team's ace. Adding to his disappointment on the field was another rejection for Japanese citizenship, the reason being given that his father was a convicted murderer. Frustration over having to change his name was obvious to all those around him. When Lena gave birth to their first child that year, Victor fought back with a sort of protest by refusing to give his newborn son a Japanese name, instead giving him the very foreign name of George, after American baseball player George Herman Ruth. A year later, his health improved, and so did his numbers, earning 26 wins in the 1942 season. But this was the season that followed the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The talent pool was reduced due to players answering the call to military service. Worst of all, Japan was now at war with America. Baseball was a sport invented by and imported from the enemy. Many fans turned away from the game, and league owners were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with their 6-foot-tall, blonde-haired, Russian-born pitcher, a constant reminder of how foreign the game really was. His life outside the ballpark was also affected. One day, while eating at a restaurant in Tokyo with his teammates, a waitress contacted the police, thinking Victor was possibly a spy. He was arrested, but released immediately. Throughout this time, he continued to succeed on the mound. He dominated the early part of the 1944 season, with a 6-0 record and a 0.68 ERA. But then, Victor was informed that he would no longer be allowed to play. He, his wife, and their son were forced to move to a wartime resettlement camp in Karuizawa. This camp was for all foreigners in Japan, even those from Germany and Italy, which were Japan's allies. During their stay in Karuizawa, Victor's health suffered. Lena, who had to nurse him through it, became very unhappy with her marriage to Victor, and with the country she was living in. Victor's father, who had remained in Tokyo, passed away, and Japan's baseball league was finally forced to shut down. When the war ended, Victor and his family were allowed to return home. While in Karuizawa, he had learned some English from an Australian who was staying there. Victor put his new language to use, working as an interpreter for the occupying U.S. forces. Not long after, he was welcomed back into the league. Though he was turned down by his old team, he was able to sign with a new team, led by his old manager. Around that time, Lena filed for divorce, leaving her husband for a Russian man who lived in America. As a result, Victor turned to heavy drinking. But he would still see a few more high points in his life. In 1949, he finished 27-17 with a .267 ERA in 376 innings, and he would eventually remarry. In the 1950s, however, his pitching was on the decline, his age and his drinking being the main causes of it. Worse yet, the league's style of play had changed into one more focused on offense, similar to Major League Baseball's change from the dead ball era to the live ball era in 1920. So the stars of pre-1950 Japanese baseball were mostly forgotten. In 1955, Victor became the first pitcher to reach 300 wins in league history, but it received little attention, as fans and media were more focused on the stars of the league's new era. It would be his final season. Once his career was over, he struggled with depression and paranoia, and his drinking became heavier. On January 12, 1957, 40-year-old Victor crashed his car into a streetcar and was killed instantly. He was supposed to attend a high school reunion that night, but never showed, and the accident occurred in a part of Tokyo he had no business being in. This has led many to believe that his death was a suicide rather than an accident. In 1960, he was inducted into the second class of the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame. In 1983, his hometown of Asahikawa named their ballpark Victor Starffin Stadium. And that is the story of Victor Starffin. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, give it a thumbs up. If you've got something to say, leave a comment. Also, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. As always, this is Baseball International, and I'll see you in the next video.